Great. Well, thank you very much. And again, let me just welcome all of the scholars and their families. We're delighted to have you here. And as I said at the beginning, I know this is a chaotic day for all of you. So I really do appreciate your taking the time to be with us today. So what I would like to do now is to take about 20 minutes and, in a sense, introduce your college career with your first college lecture. No pain, no gain, and so we're gonna start right out of the gates. And the title of my remarks today is "Living Without Lies," which you might think to be a curious title. So I begin with a controversial thesis. We live in a world of lies. Our government lies, our politicians lie, the media lies, our teachers and preachers lie, and sometimes even our friends and family lie to us. And of course, many of us lie to ourselves. One is tempted to say that lying is a part of the human condition, and maybe it is. The study of history and our day-to-day experiences would seem to support that thesis. But of course, the thesis doesn't tell the whole story. It may be truer to say that the human condition is defined by the attempt to escape and transcend the lies that surround us. To illustrate my point, let me share with you a powerful counterfactual to my thesis. In 1978, the great Czech anti-communist dissident Václav Havel published one of the most important essays of the 20th century. Its title was "The Power of the Powerless." Written under the threat of censorship, harassment, arrest, imprisonment, interrogations, and torture, Havel encouraged his countrymen to, quote, "live in the truth." But what could that possibly mean, to live in the truth? The whole communist system, from its schools to the ballet to the media to its architecture, was built to reinforce a lie, the big lie, the lie which said that socialism would lead to prosperity and freedom. Of course, just the opposite was true. Behind the veneer of this smiley-faced socialism was the brutal truth, which told a very different story. Havel illustrated his point by telling the story of a greengrocer, a shopkeeper, a nobody who sells fruits and vegetables. Every day, this otherwise invisible man obediently put a sign above his carrots and onions, urging, "Workers of the world, unite." Havel's greengrocer doesn't really care about communism. In fact, he barely even knows what it is. But he dutifully puts up the sign every day. Why? He does so partly out of habit, partly to get along, but mostly he does it out of fear. He fears the consequences of not doing so. And with this fear comes humiliation. The humiliation of not being a man who controls his own life. But then, one day, after countless petty humiliations, our greengrocer says no. And he refuses to put up the sign. He realizes that in order to preserve his sanity and his dignity, he must say no. He can't live a lie any longer. He is impelled to live within the truth. It's a small, insignificant act of disobedience that few will notice. But Havel's point, I think, is twofold. First, the invisible man of communism now becomes visible to himself. He is, in effect, born again, saved. And second, small acts of disobedience in the name of truth, replicated hundreds and then thousands of times, are the stuff of which revolutions are made. Havel's point was political. But there is, I think, an aesthetic element to his point as well. To live in the truth, in the face of a monstrous lie, has a kind of moral beauty attached to it. Beauty is harmony, and there is harmony when moral action is aligned with the truth. Havel's aesthetic injunction to live in the truth reminds me of a famously enigmatic remark made by the Russian novelist Dostoevsky, who said, "Beauty will save the world." Now, I've long pondered the meaning of this statement. What could it mean? What could it mean to say that beauty will save the world? I really don't know what Dostoevsky meant by it. But I do think there is a kind of beauty associated with moral courage in the defense of truth. And whether we understand Dostoevsky's meaning in a Christian or in a secular sense, it is true that the beauty in truth can ennoble and even save our lives. The truth is what the best of us must always seek because it's the right thing to do. But it also has a kind of redemptive power for those who have lived with lies. So let me now bring Havel's story of the greengrocer to our world today, to the world of American higher education. Until a few decades ago, most culturally literate people assumed that the higher in higher education meant two things. First, a knowledge of the greatest works of philosophy, religion, literature, painting, music, history, architecture, and science produced through the last 2,500 years of Western civilization. And second, a knowledge of the greatest deeds undertaken by men and women in order to expand the boundaries of human freedom and the bounty of human flourishing. It was assumed, therefore, that an education in the liberal arts was meant to examine the nature of human excellence and its precondition, namely freedom. At its best, a liberal arts education was also thought to do something else. It could unite and elevate a community of people in a shared intellectual and moral experience. Thus, a good liberal arts education could be said to do three things: elevate, liberate, and unite. Sadly, this is no longer the case. America's universities are not only detached from their primary purposes, they are at war with those purposes. The university is no longer the steward of high culture or even of Western civilization. Its purpose is not to preserve and perpetuate the great accomplishments of our culture, but to reject and destroy the past in order to build a new egalitarian future. It is pure nihilism, or what Ayn Rand called hatred of the good for being the good. The greatest malady of today's universities is the listless and delicate, ever so delicate relativism that has infected the humanities. This American-style relativism teaches that there are no permanent and universal moral truths. Its principal commandment is, "Thou shalt not judge." But moral relativism is not an end. It is a means to an end. That is, a radically egalitarian society held together by censorship and a rigidly enforced moral orthodoxy. This new orthodoxy says that we're all the same. Or at least the goal is to make us all the same, which is something more than just being equal. The moral political goal of the new secular theocrats on our campuses is to first deconstruct and then eliminate all differences based on race, class, gender, sexual orientation, and ability. The most obvious symptom of the decline and fall of our universities is the politically correct censorship that now pervades American higher education. Campus thought police stand ready with their speech codes and trigger warnings to censor the 7 deadly sins: patriarchy, sexism, heteronormativity, white privilege, classism, ableism, and various microaggressions, as they now call them. Many classrooms on our campuses today are little more than indoctrination sessions defined by intellectual orthodoxy and conformity. So that's the bad news. The good news, of course, is that the Lyceum Scholars program rejects all that. We are committed to restoring an older form of education now mostly lost on American college campuses. We are dedicated to instilling in our students the necessity of intellectual and moral judgment in order to know and preserve the just, the good, and the beautiful. In my view, a proper liberal arts education should hold before us what Alfred North Whitehead called the habitual vision of greatness. This view of human greatness was, of course, the primary legacy of the ancient Greeks and Romans, but it also comes to us from the Christian and modern Enlightenment traditions as well. Philippians 4:8, for instance, presents a view of education that runs parallel to the Greco-Roman tradition. Quote, Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Close quote. For several millennia, there was never much doubt about what constituted greatness. We might quibble over who was greater, Plato or Aristotle, Cicero or Seneca, Michelangelo or Da Vinci, Bach or Mozart, Locke or Smith, Jefferson or Adams, Byron or Tennyson, Dostoevsky or Tolstoy, Newton or Einstein. But we've never doubted for a moment, at least not until recently, that such men were great and that our lives were improved by our having studied and benefited from their accomplishments. The masterpieces of Western civilization are considered great because they are recognized by the best minds generation after generation as superior achievements of human thought and action. A proper liberal arts education will expose students not only to great books, great oratory, great music, great architecture, great scientific discoveries, and great technological innovations, but also to the lives of those heroic men and women whose actions in life day to day demonstrate the benevolence, magnanimity, and ingenuity of the human spirit. For example, think Anne Sullivan and Helen Keller, or Orville and Wilbur Wright. The goal of such an education is not only to deepen and widen, but ultimately to elevate the horizons of the human soul toward excellence and the permanent things, which means to prepare young men and women for a life free from the psychological, cultural, and political anchors that limit and sometimes degrade our experience of the human condition. Such an education challenges us to be better than we are. In the experience of greatness, we see the near limitless boundaries of human accomplishment, and we aspire to something more than just the banal and vulgar that dominates ordinary everyday life. We are improved as individuals and as a society by our experience and our confrontation with minds greater than our own. A liberal education begins by studying and discussing the great intellectual and cultural artifacts of Western civilization. But it must not become simply an antiquarian contemplative, or scholarly exercise divorced from human action and the living of a fully productive human life. Ultimately, its goal is to help individuals identify, clarify, understand, cultivate, and achieve their own deepest longings, which means to live better and more fulfilling lives than they might have done otherwise. In this sense, it is a deeply personal experience. A liberal arts education, rightly understood, begins with and must never lose sight of two related questions. How shall I live my life? And to what vision of greatness will I ascend? Finally, a liberal arts education has the added benefit of uniting individuals and communities in bonds of ennobling friendship. The kind of friendship that brings two or more people together in the pursuit of a common higher goal. To see, experience, know, admire, and to surround oneself with the best and most noble examples of human achievement is edifying in its own right. But it doesn't end there. What each individual experiences on his own can also be shared with others to enhance the bonds of friendship. When two or more people share with each other the experience of greatness, their relationship is simultaneously deepened and elevated. It is true that only individuals experience this kind of knowledge in their one-on-one confrontation with, say, a great book or a great piece of music or a great painting. But such works of art have the added value of engaging us in what Robert Hutchins once referred to as the great conversation. A proper education not only must study the high points of human excellence and human flourishing, but it must also study the conditions that make greatness possible. Human greatness is not possible without the freedom to think, speak, and act. Which means that a proper liberal arts education should also concern itself with identifying, explicating, and defending the role of human freedom in human accomplishment. The spirit and method of Western inquiry includes the freedom to make mistakes and to learn from those mistakes. It is the freedom to criticize our most deeply held beliefs, as painful as that may be sometimes. As we ponder the role of the liberal arts in a free society, it is important to remember that such an education does not train young men and women to become professionals of one kind or another. Its aim is not to produce astronauts, computer programmers, doctors, scientists, engineers, lawyers, or homeschoolers. Instead, it trains us to seek excellence in whatever we do, to fulfill our highest ambitions, to seek elevating and ennobling values, to be as fully human as possible. In other words, the liberally educated man or woman has the foundation to be successful and happy in all fields of endeavor. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a thinker, a philosopher with whom I rarely agree on anything, sums up the purpose of a liberal education rather nicely. Quote, "Let my student be destined for the sword, the church, the bar. I do not care. Prior to the calling of his parents is nature's call to human life. Living is the job I want to teach him. On leaving my hands, he will, I admit, be either magistrate, soldier, or priest. He will, most importantly, be a man." Close quote. In the Lyceum program, our young men and women will be at home in the world because they understand the world and they understand their place in it. Wealth, fame, and power mean very little if one's life is pinched, hollow, and fundamentally unhappy. This is why it's important for teachers in the liberal arts to challenge their students to connect theory to practice, to resist the temptation, to treat ideas as ends in themselves or as disconnected from life. They must test the ideas provided by these books against reality. The reality of human nature as experienced through introspection, the observation of others, and the study of history. Teachers and students must always ask one question. Is it true? Then and only then can a liberal arts education serve as an indispensable foundation for living the most completely satisfying and fulfilling life. In conclusion, I'd like to leave you with two thoughts. First, to the parents. I'd like to thank you for giving us this opportunity to embark on this intellectual journey with your sons and daughters. It is an honor and a privilege. And second, to the students. Before we begin our intellectual odyssey, please, don't just say goodbye to mom and dad. I would remind you to thank them. Thank them for everything they have done to give you the opportunity for greatness and to live in the truth. Thank you.